Ancient empires spoke to each other across thousands of miles. This is the story of the road builders, the unseen architects who wove a hidden web of pathways connecting lost worlds. By the end of this journey, you will see human history as a single, interconnected story, not a collection of isolated events. We will uncover how Roman engineers laid highways so straight they defied nature, and how desert traders navigated oceans of sand using the stars. What forgotten network do you think still whispers its secrets beneath our feet today? A single line of stones, half buried in an endless sea of sand, was all he found. To anyone else, it would have been meaningless, just another collection of desert rocks. But to the archaeologist surveying this remote stretch, the alignment was too perfect, too deliberate to be natural. This faint scar on the earth was a ghost, the lingering whisper of the world's oldest known trade route. These were the first networks, born not from empires, but from necessity. In the Neolithic era, as hunter-gatherers began to settle, they etched trails into the landscape, pathways for the vital exchange of resources. They connected a precious water source here to a flint-rich quarry there, a fertile valley to a distant sacred site. These were the original roads, and they carried more than just people. They carried ideas. Renowned historian Dr. Elena Vance describes these initial paths as the first synapses firing in the global brain of civilization. They were not yet the organized highways of Rome, but the vital, pulsing capillaries that allowed life to flow. Geography was the great architect of these routes. A mountain pass, a river ford, a narrow stretch between two deserts, these natural features funneled human movement into predictable channels. What did they trade along these corridors? Obsidian, a volcanic glass sharper than any modern steel, was hauled from its few sources across hundreds of miles to become tools and weapons. Shimmering seashells from distant coasts found their way deep inland, becoming prized ornaments. The most stunning example is Baltic amber, a fossilized tree resin that traveled from the damp forests of northern Europe all the way to the sun-baked tombs of Egyptian pharaohs. Can you fathom the journey? One small, golden object passing from hand to hand over thousands of miles, connecting worlds that had no idea the other existed. This was not merely commerce, it was the birth of a connected world. These routes enabled the first complex social interactions between different groups. Languages, technologies, and beliefs began to travel alongside the obsidian and the amber. The very act of creating a path, of deciding to walk toward the unknown, speaks to something fundamental within us. What does this tell us about our innate human desires? It reveals a deep, relentless drive for connection, for exploration, for reaching beyond the horizon. This foundational web of desire and necessity, etched by countless footsteps, set the stage for every complex system that would follow. It was the humble, yet revolutionary, beginning of a story that would eventually span the entire globe. These ancient pathways did not carve themselves into the earth. They were the life's work of master architects, anonymous heroes whose names are lost to time, but whose legacy is written in stone and soil. Across continents and eras, a diverse cast of characters took up the same monumental task. In Rome, it was the legions themselves, soldier engineers who carried surveying tools alongside their swords. In the Andes, it was the Inca stonemasons, fitting granite blocks so perfectly that not a blade of grass could slip between them. In the vast Persian Empire, it was dedicated royal road crews maintaining a 2,500-mile highway from the capital to the coast. What drove these people to undertake such Herculean labors? Their motivations were as complex as the roads they built. For empires like Rome and Qin dynasty China, the primary driver was military expansion and control. A straight, wide road was a line of power, allowing legions to march swiftly to crush rebellions and secure distant frontiers. The Qin emperor standardized the very axial width of carts across China, ensuring his armies and supply wagons could travel seamlessly on every new road built, effectively turning the entire nation into a single, efficient war machine. But the purpose was not always conquest. For other cultures, roads were conduits for faith, enabling pilgrims to reach sacred sites, or they were economic lifelines designed to funnel precious trade goods like silk, gold, and spices directly into the imperial treasury. The true genius of these builders lay in their innovative techniques for conquering geography. Roman surveyors used an instrument called a groma, a simple cross of wood that let them sight perfectly straight lines for miles, cutting through forests and over hills with an unnerving disregard for the natural curves of the land. They built raised causeways through marshes and carved stepped roads down the sides of mountains. In South America, the Inca faced the ultimate topographic challenge, the Andes. Their solution was a network of suspension bridges woven from mountain grasses and stone staircases that scaled peaks touching the clouds. Organizing this work required a staggering logistical effort. It was a pyramid of labor, from the state-sponsored engineers who drafted the grand plans, down to the managers overseeing quarries, to the thousands of workers, often conscripted soldiers or local villagers, who moved the earth and laid the stones. These roads were more than just physical structures, they were powerful symbols. Every mile of paved highway was a statement of imperial unity, a tangible claim that this diverse and sprawling territory was now one. The very act of building a road was an act of claiming the land itself. How did they overcome barriers like the Sahara or the Himalayas? They did not fight nature, they learned to read it. They followed the paths of migratory animals, trusted the knowledge of local guides, and used the stars to navigate featureless deserts. Their legacy is a testament to a universal human ingenuity, proving that no mountain was too high and no desert too wide for the determined road builder. This relentless drive to connect would soon give rise to networks of a scale and complexity that would dwarf even the greatest of these ancient highways. A golden statue could be captured, but the idea that inspired its creation could not. While legions marched on stone highways, a far more subtle network was at work, a silk road of the mind where philosophies, stories, and discoveries traveled with a speed and permanence that physical goods could never match. These were the invisible highways, the conceptual routes that carried the very essence of civilization. Scholar Dr. Liam Chen describes them as the channels that allowed for the cross-pollination of philosophies and technologies, often proving more enduring than their physical counterparts. Consider the journey of a single astronomical concept. In ancient Babylon, priests meticulously charted the movements of Venus, recording their observations on clay tablets. Centuries later, this precise data traveled westward, influencing Greek astronomers who wove it into their own models of the cosmos. The knowledge itself was the cargo, passed from one great culture to another without a single road being built specifically for it. These conceptual pathways operated through ingenious, non-physical guides. Oral traditions were not merely stories, they were living maps and historical archives. In Australia, Aboriginal cultures developed songlines, intricate cycles of songs that describe the landscape in minute detail. By singing the melodies, a traveler could navigate vast, featureless deserts, each verse corresponding to a specific waterhole, rock formation, or mountain range. The land itself was a melody to be walked. Similarly, Viking navigators used sunstones, crystals that could polarize sunlight to locate the sun's position even on overcast days, turning the sky itself into a roadmap for their daring voyages across the open ocean. The intermediaries of these networks were as vital as the routes themselves. It was the trader resting at a caravanserai who shared a new myth from a distant land. It was the Buddhist monk walking a pilgrimage route who carried sacred texts and artistic styles from India to China and beyond. It was the storyteller in a medieval market whose tales spread literary motifs across continents. They were the human routers of information, moving ideas along the same physical trails used for silk and spice. How does this challenge our definition of a road? It forces us to expand it. A road is not merely a physical space for travel, but any consistent channel that facilitates connection and transmission. A song can be a road, a shared star chart can be a road, a recurring symbol in art passed down for generations can mark a highway of cultural memory. Understanding these intangible routes reveals a deeper, richer layer of ancient connectivity, a world where the most powerful networks were those you could not see, only hear or know or feel. A Roman traveler would not unfold a map to see the shape of the land, but to read a list of destinations. The Tabula Peutingeriana, a breathtakingly long scroll copy of an ancient Roman itinerary, depicts the world as a series of roads stretched like ribbons between elaborate city symbols. Distances are meticulously noted, but mountains and seas are mere decorative squiggles on the margins. This was not a geographic representation. It was a practical network diagram for the imperial administration, a timetable for movement and control. Ancient maps were rarely about literal accuracy. They were complex documents that blended the measurable world with mythology, power, and deep cultural belief. Cartographic historian Dr. Anya Sharma explains that these maps were less about depicting territory and more about asserting a worldview, placing one's own culture and gods at the center of the known universe. The materials themselves tell a story of purpose and permanence. Babylonians pressed cuneiform into clay tablets, charting their world as a flat disk surrounded by a bitter river. Medieval monks labored over vellum, creating T and O maps that showed Jerusalem as the spiritual center of a world divided among the 3 continents of Noah's sons. Yet for every intricate parchment, there were countless maps that left no physical trace. They existed solely in the minds of travelers, passed down through generations as oral lore. The most stunning examples come from the Marshall Islands. There, master navigators constructed charts from palm fronds and cowrie shells. The shells did not represent the islands themselves, but the intersections of ocean swells and currents. To read one of these stick charts was to feel the rhythm of the sea, to navigate by the invisible forces beneath the waves rather than the static landmarks above them. This reveals a fundamental truth about ancient wayfinding. The map was not the territory, it was a set of instructions for moving through it. A Roman roadmap prioritized time and resources. A Polynesian wave chart prioritized the dynamic energy of the ocean. A medieval Mappa Mundi prioritized the path to salvation. Each culture mapped what it deemed most important for survival and meaning. What can these symbolic guides teach us about their creators? They show us that every society constructs its own reality, drawing lines of connection that make sense within its own universe. These lines, whether inked on vellum or woven from palm fronds, were the ultimate keys to unlocking the vast, invisible networks that tied the ancient world together. A caravan of dust-caked camels emerges from the shimmering heat of the Taklamakan Desert, their bells announcing the arrival of more than just merchants. They carry bundles of silk, sacks of pungent spices, and locked chests holding something even more valuable: ideas. This was the Silk Road in motion, the most famous ancient network of them all, a pulsating artery of exchange that linked the Han dynasty in the east to the Roman Empire in the west. Historian Peter Frankopan reminds us it was never a single paved highway, but a sprawling web of overland trails and maritime passages, a transcontinental system that operated for more than 1,500 years. Its origins lie in the ambitious diplomacy of the Han dynasty. The Emperor Wu sent an envoy named Zhang Qian on a mission west to forge an alliance against a common enemy. Zhang Qian was captured and held for a decade, but he never forgot his duty. He eventually escaped and continued his journey, returning to China years later with no military alliance, but with something far more transformative: detailed knowledge of the sophisticated civilizations to the west. His reports of powerful horses and unknown riches ignited the Chinese imperial imagination and set the stage for deliberate, state-sponsored exploration and connection. The peak of this connectivity came under the Mongol Empire. In an era often defined by its brutality, the Mongols created an unprecedented peace across the territories they controlled, a Pax Mongolica that made the Silk Road safer than it had ever been. Trade caravans could move from the China Sea to the Black Sea under the protection of a single authority, allowing for a true explosion of commercial and cultural traffic. The goods that traveled these routes are legendary. Chinese silk was worth its weight in gold in Rome. Porcelain, paper, and lacquerware moved west, while glassware, gold, and silver moved east. But the physical cargo was only half the story. Walking alongside the camels were Buddhist monks carrying sutras from India into Central Asia and China. Mathematical concepts, including the numeral system we use today, traveled from India to the Islamic world and eventually into Europe. Even disease used these routes, with the Black Death likely spreading from Asia into Europe along these very trade lines. This exchange was facilitated by legendary hubs, oasis cities that grew fabulously wealthy on the taxes and services they provided. Samarkand, with its turquoise-domed markets, was a melting pot of Persian, Turkish, and Chinese influences. Constantinople stood as the great Western terminus, a bustling metropolis where goods and ideas from two continents met and mingled. The journey, however, was fraught with almost unimaginable peril. Travelers faced bandits, starvation, and the terrifying sandstorms of the Taklamakan, whose name itself translates to the place of no return. How did this network fundamentally alter the civilizations it touched? It rewired the world. The taste for silk in Rome affected its economy. The adoption of paper in the Islamic world preserved and advanced classical knowledge. Buddhism found a new home and flourished in China, Korea, and Japan. The Silk Road did not just move luxury items, it redistributed the very foundations of culture, science, and belief, proving that the most powerful connections are those that change what people know and how they see the world. While the Silk Road's caravans snaked across continents, another kind of road was being charted across the trackless blue. A Phoenician merchant ship, its hull laden with precious glass and purple dye, rides the Atlantic swell, its crew navigating by starlight toward the tin-rich shores of prehistoric Britain. These maritime networks were the true superhighways of antiquity, carrying volumes of trade and ideas that land routes could never hope to match. Maritime archaeologist Dr. Susan Reyes emphasizes that the sea was not a barrier but a connector on a colossal scale. A diverse cast of cultures mastered these liquid pathways. The Phoenicians, venturing from their Levantine homeland, established a web of trading posts across the Mediterranean, founding cities like Carthage. The Vikings, in their iconic longships, used their advanced seamanship to raid, trade, and settle from North America to the rivers of Russia. In the vast Pacific, the Polynesians undertook the most audacious voyages of all, settling islands scattered across millions of square miles of open ocean in double-hulled canoes. What technologies made such journeys possible? Innovation was the key to survival. The lateen sail, a triangular rig invented in the Indian Ocean or the Red Sea, allowed ships to sail efficiently against the wind, revolutionizing trade. The Polynesian outrigger canoe provided stability in rough seas, while the Viking sun compass and their understanding of seabirds and wave patterns turned the featureless ocean into a readable map. Their navigation was a symphony of environmental observation. They memorized the precise positions of hundreds of stars. They followed the flight paths of birds known to nest on land. They learned to read the subtle refraction of swells as they bounced off distant, unseen islands. This knowledge was a sacred trust passed down through generations of master navigators. These voyages gave rise to legendary port cities that became hubs of global exchange. Alexandria in Egypt, with its famed lighthouse, connected the Mediterranean with the Nile and the Red Sea. Carthage grew powerful from its control of Western Mediterranean trade. In the east, ports like Calicut on India's Malabar coast thrived as meeting points for Arab, Indian, Chinese, and later European merchants. The cargo that moved across these waves shaped economies and diets. Spices like pepper and cinnamon traveled from the Moluccas to the palaces of Europe. Pearls from the Persian Gulf, timber from Lebanon, and Chinese porcelain filled the holds of these ships. But just as on land, the most profound exchanges were intangible. Hindu priests and Buddhist monks traveled on these merchant vessels, spreading their religions and art throughout Southeast Asia. The epic colonization of remote Oceania by the Lapita people stands as a testament to this drive. Beginning around 3,500 years ago, they sailed from island to island across thousands of miles of unknown Pacific, carrying with them their distinctive pottery, agriculture, and language, ultimately populating lands from Vanuatu to Samoa. What drove these ancient sailors to risk everything on such perilous journeys? The lure of unimaginable profit was a powerful engine, but it was also something deeper, that timeless human spirit of discovery, the irresistible call to see what lay beyond the horizon, no matter the cost. The sound of a legion's march was the heartbeat of Rome, a rhythmic pounding of hobnailed sandals on stone that echoed for centuries. This was the purpose of the Roman road, not as a gentle path for travelers, but as a steel spine for an empire. From the Republic's early strides to the empire's vast reach, these highways were the ultimate tool of control. A governor in Hispania could dispatch a cohort along the Via Augusta to crush a distant rebellion with a speed that stunned local tribes, while imperial messengers, the cursus publicus, could relay edicts from the Tiber to the Thames in a matter of weeks, not months. The Roman world lived and died by the efficiency of its roads. Their construction was a marvel of systematic engineering, a brutal poetry written in layers of stone and mortar. Legionaries, who were as much engineers as soldiers, would first dig a trench, then pack it with a foundation of large stones called the statumen. On top of this, they laid a thick layer of rubble mixed with lime, the rudus, followed by a finer core of gravel and cement known as the nucleus. The final surface, the summa crusta, was a masterwork of fitted volcanic stone slabs, cambered to shed rainwater into drainage ditches. The result was a road that could withstand the weight of endless army columns and supply wagons, a structure so robust that many still form the base of modern European highways. The historian Titus Livius captured this strategic genius, noting how these roads allowed Rome to project its power with terrifying swiftness, a reality encapsulated in the famous phrase that all roads lead to Rome. This monumental labor was performed by a massive, organized workforce. Legions built the main strategic routes, their military discipline applied to moving earth and setting stone. On other projects, vast gangs of slaves and conscripted local laborers provided the brute force, all directed by highly skilled surveyors. These technicians used ingenious tools to impose their geometric will upon the landscape. The groma, a simple cross of wood and weighted strings, allowed them to sight dead straight lines for miles, while the chorobates, a long wooden frame with a water channel, ensured their roadbeds were perfectly level, even across rolling hills. These roads were never isolated projects. They were integrated with other infrastructural marvels, marching in tandem with soaring aqueducts and crossing rivers on enduring stone bridges, creating a unified circulatory system for the entire empire. The Fosseway in Britain is a perfect example of a road as a political statement. Stretching from the southwest to the northeast, it was built in the first years of the conquest and for a time effectively marked the military frontier of Roman Britain. It was a line of communication, a supply route, and a powerful symbolic boundary, separating the civilized, controlled territory to the southeast from the untamed lands of the tribes to the northwest. Its very presence was a claim of ownership, a tool for both defining and integrating a new province. How did this sprawling network contribute to Rome's incredible longevity? It created cohesion. A merchant in Gaul, a tax collector in Egypt, and a retired centurion in Dacia all shared the same physical connection to the capital. They walked on the same style of road, saw the same imperial milestones marking the distance, and were bound by the same system of law and commerce that the highways made possible. The Roman model, a perfect fusion of engineering ambition and imperial will, set a standard that every road builder for the next 2,000 years would strive to match. High in the thin air of the Andes, a chasqui runner sprints along a stone-paved path, his breath a steady plume in the frigid mountain dawn. He carries more than a message. He is the living pulse of the Inca Empire, a civilization that built its roads not to conquer nature, but to become one with it. This was the Quhapac-Ñan, the Royal Road, a 15,000-mile network that stitched together the most vertically challenging terrain on the planet, from coastal deserts to cloud forests to peaks scraping the sky. Unlike the straight, assertive lines of Rome, Inca roads were masterpieces of adaptation. They flowed with the land, tracing ridgelines to avoid valley floods and scaling impossible cliffs with staircases carved directly into the living rock. Anthropologist Dr. Maria Flores describes this as a philosophy of sacred geography, where the road was a respectful guest in a powerful, animate landscape, not its master. At the heart of this system was the capital, Cusco, conceived as the navel of the world. From this center, 4 great highways reached out to the empire's 4 quarters, a physical manifestation of the Inca cosmic order. To sustain travel across such vast distances, the Incas built tambos, way stations placed a day's walk apart. These were not grand hotels, but functional shelters offering food, shelter, and supplies for imperial personnel, from soldiers to administrators. The true test of their engineering genius, however, was crossing the deep gorges that scarred the Andes. Their solution was the suspension bridge, woven not from steel, but from the tough fibers of the iku grass. Communities living near a chasm were responsible for its maintenance, a continuous duty that involved braiding new cables and replacing the worn wooden deck. The entire network was built and maintained through a labor tax system known as the mitre. Every household across the empire owed a certain number of days of work each year to the state. This rotated labor force, directed by expert stonemasons, moved mountains of earth and fitted stones with such precision that their walls still stand centuries later without any mortar. The roads carried a diverse stream of life, llama caravans, their bells softly clinking, moved goods like freeze-dried potatoes, coca leaves, and brilliant textiles. Military units could be rapidly deployed along these high-speed routes, and pilgrims traveled to sacred sites or huacas that were deliberately connected by the road system itself. Communication over these vast distances was managed with breathtaking efficiency. The Chasqui runners operated in a relay. A runner would sprint from one post to the next, shouting his message or passing a knotted cord quipu, which served as a sophisticated recording device for numerical and narrative information. The next runner, hearing the message, would then race to the next post. In this way, a message could travel over 150 miles in a single day. The final approach to Machu Picchu is the Q-Hapak Nyan in microcosm. The trail is a sequence of engineering marvels, from the stone stairway that ascends the nearly vertical pass at Dead Woman's Pass, to the tunnels carved through solid granite, to the breathtaking final descent through the Sun Gate. Every step was calculated, every stone placed with intention, guiding the traveler through a landscape both physically and spiritually immense. What does this network teach us about sustainable infrastructure? The Inca roads were built to last, but they were also built to belong. They worked with the grain of the mountains, avoiding the ecological disruption of massive cuts and fills. They demonstrate that the most enduring connections are not those that impose our will upon the world, but those that find a way to weave our needs into the existing tapestry of the earth. This delicate balance, achieved at an empire's scale, stands as a quiet challenge to our own modern methods of building. A desert wind does not erase a path, it simply hides it in plain sight. For the Tuareg guides leading their camels across the Sahara, the route was not a line on the ground but a map written in the stars, the shape of the dunes, and the direction of the wind. These were the Trans-Saharan routes, a web of trails that dared to cross the world's largest desert, linking the gold-rich kingdoms of West Africa to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. Historian Dr. Amina Diallo calls these desert tracks the vital lifelines, enabling the exchange of gold, salt, and ideas between vastly different cultures. The challenge was absolute. Traders faced an ocean of sand where water sources were days apart and shifting dunes could bury a trail in hours. The daytime heat was a physical force, while the night brought a cold that seeped into the bones. Survival depended on a deep, accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. They navigated by the sun and the constellations, reading the wind patterns that sculpted the ergs, the great sand seas. They memorized the location of subtle landmarks, a specific rock formation, a lone acacia tree that served as waypoints in a featureless void. The camel was their ship, an animal perfectly evolved for this environment, capable of carrying heavy loads for days without water. The economic engine of this network was a simple, powerful exchange. From the south came gold, mined in vast quantities in the forests of Ghana, and later the Empire of Mali. From the north came salt, quarried in blindingly white slabs from the desolate mines of Taghaza, a commodity so precious in the tropics that it was literally worth its weight in gold. This trade gave rise to legendary cities that grew wealthy as intermediaries. Timbuktu became not just a market, but a radiant center of Islamic scholarship and culture, its libraries and universities attracting thinkers from across Africa and the Middle East. The caravans themselves were moving cities, sometimes comprising thousands of camels and hundreds of people. They were complex social structures, led by experienced guides and protected by guards, moving in a disciplined line that could stretch for miles across the sand. Their journey was punctuated by caravanserais, fortified way stations that offered not just rest and water, but also security, a place to repair gear, and a bustling marketplace for local trade. The sheer economic power flowing through these routes was dramatically illustrated by the pilgrimage of Mansa Musa, the Emperor of Mali, in the 14th century. His journey to Mecca was a procession of staggering wealth, with a caravan of 60,000 people carrying 12 tons of pure gold, which he distributed so generously along his route that he inadvertently caused inflation in the economies of Egypt and the Arabian Peninsula for years. His journey put Mali on the map of the medieval world, a testament to the wealth generated by these desert highways. How did these harsh environments shape the cultures that relied on them? They forged a unique resilience and a profound respect for knowledge. The desert rewarded those who could read its subtle signs and punished those who could not. It created societies where the guide was as revered as the king, and where a single, well-maintained well was more valuable than a palace. These networks prove that the most forbidding landscapes are not empty. They are simply waiting for those who know how to listen, to learn, and to find the invisible roads written upon the earth. A lone explorer's machete strikes not soil, but a surface of pure white stone, a ghostly ribbon cutting through the emerald gloom of the rainforest. This is a Maya sakbi, a raised ceremonial road, one of the countless overgrown pathways that wove the civilizations of Mesoamerica into a single, intricate tapestry. In the sweltering jungles of Central and South America, the Maya, the Olmec, and their successors faced a unique architectural adversary, the land itself. Relentless humidity rotted wood, torrential rains washed away soil, and voracious vegetation reclaimed any clearing in a matter of months. To build a road here was to declare war on the jungle. Their solution was the causeway, an elevated highway built from layers of stone and packed earth, then paved with brilliant white limestone plaster that gleamed under the canopy, visible for miles and resistant to flooding. These were not mere trails, but sophisticated feats of engineering. Archaeologists have uncovered sakbiob that run for over 60 miles, connecting major ceremonial centers like Tikal and Karakol in a vast web of political and spiritual alliance. The construction required immense communal effort. Workers quarried limestone, burned it to create plaster, and hauled countless tons of fill to raise the roadbed several feet above the swampy ground. The result was a dry, stable passage through an otherwise impassable world. But what traveled these white roads, the cargo was as rich as the environment was harsh. Jade, mined from distant mountains and carved into exquisite ornaments for royalty, moved along these routes. Bags of cacao beans, which served as both currency and the basis for a sacred chocolate drink, were carried by porters. Resplendent quetzal feathers, more valuable than gold, were transported from the highland clouds to adorn the headdresses of lowland kings. These roads carried more than luxury goods. They carried pilgrims to holy sites, armies to battle, and information between rival city-states. The very alignment of these pathways was sacred. Many sakbiob were constructed with precise astronomical orientations, pointing directly to the rising or setting of the sun, moon, or Venus on significant dates. This turned the entire landscape into a celestial calendar, where a journey down a road was also a movement through sacred time. Scholar Dr. Elena Vance notes that walking a sakbi was a ritual act, a physical manifestation of a connection to the gods and the cosmic order. This network was complemented by a second, liquid highway, the region's rivers. Canoes piled high with goods plied these waterways, connecting coastal trade with the inland routes, creating a multimodal transport system of astonishing efficiency. The ultimate scale of this ambition is only now being revealed deep in the Guatemalan jungle. At the ancient city of El Mirador, archaeologists have mapped a causeway system of staggering complexity, with massive raised roads linking a sprawling metropolitan area that was home to hundreds of thousands of people long before the classic Maya period. This discovery rewrites our understanding of early urbanism, proving the preclassic Maya were not simple villagers but master road builders on an imperial scale. So what secrets do these overgrown paths hold about the collapse of the classic Maya civilization? The answer may lie in the roads themselves. As political alliances fractured and central authority broke down, the maintenance of these vast networks would have become impossible. A fallen tree blocking a sakbi, a washed-out section left unrepaired, these were not just inconveniences, they were ruptures in the very circulatory system of the civilization. The silence that followed was not an absence of people, but a failure of connection, a reminder that even the most brilliant networks can be reclaimed by the jungle if the will to sustain them is lost. A single piece of Baltic amber, warmed by the sun, held more than a trapped insect. It held a map of the ancient world. This golden fossilized resin, glowing like captured sunlight, was the lifeblood of one of history's most enduring trade routes. For thousands of years, the Amber Road channeled this northern treasure from the stormy Baltic shores all the way to the sun-baked palaces of Egyptian pharaohs, creating a glowing artery of prehistoric commerce. Its story begins not with empires, but with the first farmers and hunters of the Neolithic era who picked the strange, warm stones from the beaches and recognized something special within them. They valued it not just for its beauty, but for its perceived magical properties, a substance that could be electrified by friction and was believed to hold the power of the sun itself. Trade historians note that this was not a single, paved highway like those of Rome, but a shifting, fluid network of trails and river routes, a chain of hand-to-hand exchanges that stretched across the continent. The journey started with the gatherers along the Baltic coast, who developed ingenious methods for harvesting the amber. They would wade into the chilly waters after storms to collect pieces churned up from the seabed, or even venture out in log boats to dredge the precious nodules from underwater deposits. Once collected, the raw amber began its long trek south. It passed through countless middlemen, traveling up the Vistula and Oder rivers into the heart of Central Europe. Here, tribal societies acted as crucial intermediaries, controlling the flow of goods and accumulating wealth and influence. The amber would then cross the formidable barrier of the Alps through high mountain passes, finally reaching the sophisticated markets of the Etruscan and later Greek civilizations in northern Italy. At key trading posts like Aquileia, near the head of the Adriatic Sea, the raw amber was transformed. Skilled artisans heated and polished the resin, carving it into intricate beads, pendants, and amulets shaped like animals and gods. These finished pieces were then distributed across the Mediterranean world. In return for the glowing northern gold, the Baltic peoples received goods that were exotic and precious to them: bronze for making superior tools and weapons, fine Italian wine, and luxurious textiles from the south. This exchange created a complex early economy, linking the fates of distant cultures. The most stunning testament to the Amber Road's incredible reach was discovered in the tomb of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun. Among the golden treasures, archaeologists found a scarab beetle carving made not from lapis lazuli or carnelian, but from Baltic amber. This single object had traveled over 2,500 miles, passing through dozens of cultures and languages, to rest in the burial chamber of a king who ruled over a civilization that had no direct knowledge of the resin's foggy, northern origin. Why was this substance so universally coveted? Its value was a powerful fusion of the tangible and the mystical. It was a beautiful, warm, and workable material, but it was also seen as a talisman, a piece of the sun gifted by the gods, capable of warding off evil and ensuring health. Its enduring trade illuminates a prehistoric value system where worth was not dictated by coin, but by rarity, beauty, and a shared belief in the supernatural. The glow of amber was more than a physical property. It was the light of connection itself, guiding the way through a dark and vast continent long before the first map was ever drawn. A Portuguese carack heavy with peppercorns and cloves represented far more than a single ship's cargo. It was a floating earthquake, shifting the very axis of global power. These humble seeds, barks, and buds were the engine of history, drawing fleets from across the world into the complex, ancient web of the Indian Ocean spice routes. For centuries before Europeans arrived, this maritime world thrived on seasonal rhythms. Arab and Indian merchants had long mastered the monsoon winds, sailing their graceful dhows eastward on the summer currents and returning home on the winter ones, their holds filled with treasures. The spices they sought were legendary, each with a mythical origin. Pepper, known as black gold, grew on the Malabar coast of India. Cinnamon was the fragrant bark unrolled from trees in Sri Lanka. The most precious and rare spices, nutmeg and cloves, came only from a tiny archipelago, the Maluku Islands, a place so remote its location was a fiercely guarded secret. To taste these flavors was to taste the exotic unknown itself. The Moroccan scholar and traveler Ibn Battuta vividly described the chaotic, vibrant ports that served as the network's hubs. In places like Calicut and Malacca, a dozen languages could be heard on the docks, and the air was thick with the scents of sandalwood, pepper, and salt. Sailing these routes was a calculated gamble. Merchants had to catch the monsoon perfectly or risk being stranded for months, and they faced pirates, shipwrecks, and the constant, hidden danger of scurvy. The ships themselves were marvels of specialized design. The Arabian dhow, with its lateen sail, could tack skillfully against the wind, while the massive Chinese junks were floating fortresses, capable of carrying hundreds of tons of cargo in their watertight compartments. For Europe, these spices were not merely a luxury, they were a necessity. They preserved meat through long winters, and they were a status symbol that defined the aristocratic table. The entire supply chain was controlled by a long line of middlemen. Arab merchants brought the spices to Alexandria, Venetian traders purchased them there, and the Venetian Republic then distributed them across Europe at a staggering markup, creating a monopoly of immense power and wealth. It was this very markup that finally pushed European kingdoms to seek a direct path to the source, to break the Venetian stranglehold by sea. How did this culinary desire reshape the world map? It literally redrew it. The Portuguese, led by Vasco da Gama, finally rounded the Cape of Good Hope and burst into the Indian Ocean, bypassing centuries of established tradition. They were followed by the Dutch, the English, and the Spanish, each using superior naval cannon to carve out their own colonial empires centered on spice production. The tiny Banda Islands, the world's only source of nutmeg, became the site of horrific massacres and enslavement as the Dutch fought to control every single tree. The search for spices did not just connect the world, it fused it together through conflict, exchange, and a relentless hunger for flavor, launching the very first age of globalization. A carved stone head with a bearded, Semitic face stares out from the jungle of Guatemala, a visage utterly alien to the classic Maya world. Discoveries like this one at La Venta fuel one of history's most heated debates. Did ancient mariners, Phoenician traders, or Chinese treasure fleets cross the world's greatest oceans and reach the Americas long before Columbus? The idea challenges a foundational belief that the hemispheres developed in complete isolation. The debate hinges on a collection of tantalizing yet often ambiguous clues. Proponents point to artistic parallels, like the similar styles of pyramid construction in Mesoamerica and Egypt. They highlight linguistic echoes, such as alleged Chinese loanwords in Native American languages. More concrete are the botanical exchanges. The sweet potato, a plant native to South America, was found across Polynesia when European explorers first arrived. Its Polynesian name, Kumara, is strikingly similar to its name in some Andean languages. Could this staple crop have been carried across the Pacific by pre-Columbian voyagers? The possibility is supported by the known seafaring prowess of the Polynesians, who mastered the world's largest ocean. Their double-hulled voyaging canoes were capable of incredible journeys, and some researchers suggest they might have reached the coast of South America, returning with the sweet potato. On the other side of the continent, another plant tells a similar story. Bottle gourds of African origin appear in ancient American sites, suggesting they may have floated across the Atlantic, still viable, or been carried by human hands. The technological feasibility is a core part of the argument. Author Gavin Menzies controversially claims that the massive fleets of the Chinese Admiral Zheng he circled the globe in the 1400s, decades before Columbus. Mainstream historians vehemently dispute his evidence, pointing to a lack of shipwrecks, settlements, or definitive Chinese records of such a voyage. Yet, the ships themselves were certainly capable. Chinese junks were among the largest and most seaworthy vessels of the ancient world, equipped with watertight bulkheads and sophisticated rudders. Similarly, we know that Phoenician vessels regularly ventured beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, and Egyptian reed boats have been proven, through modern recreations like the Roman II expedition, to be capable of crossing the Atlantic using the Canary Current. The journey, while perilous, was technologically possible. The evidence on the ground, however, remains stubbornly enigmatic. Artifacts like the Bat Creek stone found in Tennessee, which some argue bears a Paleo-Hebrew inscription, are fiercely contested. Mainstream archaeology demands a higher standard of proof, asking for clear, stratified settlements, distinctive pottery, or undeniable genetic markers to confirm such profound contact. They argue that isolated artifacts can be hoaxes or misidentifications, and that similarities in art or mythology can arise independently in different cultures facing similar human experiences. The possibility of incidental voyages must also be considered. A Japanese fishing boat disabled by a storm could have drifted across the Pacific on the Kuroshio Current, landing its few, bewildered survivors on the shores of North America. Such events would leave little archaeological trace beyond a story that might become legend. So, what would verified trans-oceanic contact rewrite? It would shatter the concept of the pristine, isolated New World. It would mean that ideas, technologies, and genes were exchanged on a global scale far earlier than our textbooks allow, suggesting that the ancient world was a much more interconnected and perhaps more curious place than we have ever dared to believe. A caravan's steady rhythm was not the sound of footsteps, but the soft plod of hooves in the dust. These animals were the true engines of the ancient world, the living, breathing technology that made vast networks possible. Without the biological genius of a handful of key species, those sprawling roads and desert tracks would have been silent and empty. The domestication of creatures like the camel, the horse, and the llama was a revolution on par with the invention of the wheel. It transformed human ambition from a local dream into a continental reality. Each animal was a marvel of evolutionary adaptation, perfectly suited to conquer a specific environment. The Bactrian camel, with its two humps storing fat, could travel for weeks across the blistering sands of the Taklamakan without water. In the thin, frigid air of the Himalayas, the shaggy-coated yak carried salt and wool, its broad hooves providing stability on icy trails. The elephant, with its immense strength and intelligence, became the ultimate jungle vehicle, capable of clearing paths and hauling massive logs through dense rainforests where no cart could ever go. These were not simply beasts of burden, They were specialized partners in the grand project of connection. Integrating these animals into the network required a deep, generational understanding of their needs. This went far beyond simple breeding. It was a science of training and logistics. The famous Arabian horse was revered not just for its speed, but for its endurance and loyalty, qualities honed over centuries of selective breeding for desert warfare and long-distance travel. The llamas of the Andes were the only large pack animal native to the Americas, and the Inca developed a sophisticated system of corrals and grazing lands along the Quhapac-Ñan to support the endless caravans that moved goods across the empire. The infrastructure built for these animals was as vital as the roads themselves. Caravanserais dotted the Silk Road, offering safe enclosures, fresh water, and stored fodder for thousands of camels and their handlers. The Roman cursus publicus maintained a network of stables and way stations where official messengers could exchange their tired horses for fresh mounts, a system that allowed information to travel at a speed that was breathtaking for the ancient world. This principle of relay finds a famous echo in the American Pony Express of the 1860s. While a much later system, it perfectly illustrates the timeless use of the horse for rapid communication. Riders would gallop at full speed between stations, switching to a new, rested horse every 10 miles, pushing the biological limits of the animal to achieve a pace that kept a continent connected. This was the same logic used by the Inca chasqui runners, only with a four-legged partner sharing the burden. So how did the animals themselves shape the routes? The answer is written in the landscape. A mountain pass had to be gentle enough for a loaded ox cart. A desert trail had to connect water sources within a camel's range. The very location of a trading city was often determined by the geography of grazing, by the presence of a reliable well that could sustain the animals that sustained the trade. These living engines were not passive tools, they were active participants. Their physical capabilities and limitations dictated the flow of history, carving the invisible networks of the ancient world not with maps, but with their own innate needs and extraordinary strength. The Athenian agora was more than a marketplace. It was an economic engine humming with the energy of a dozen different currencies and languages. Here, the true purpose of all those ancient roads and sea lanes became stunningly clear. They were not just paths for travelers, they were the arteries of a global economic heartbeat, pumping commodities, wealth, and unprecedented power across the known world. At the core of this system was a powerful, almost intuitive principle. Different regions learned to specialize in what they did best, a concept economic historians call comparative advantage. A valley with perfect soil for olives would dedicate itself to producing oil, while a coastal town rich in salt would trade it for grain from an inland plain. This specialization created interdependence, binding distant communities into a single, fragile economic web that thrived on constant exchange. The methods of that exchange evolved dramatically. Early networks relied on simple barter, a direct swap of goods for goods, but this was cumbersome and inefficient. How many pots equal one cow? The solution was the invention of money. In Lydia, they struck the first coins from electrum. In China, they cast bronze replicas of tools and cowrie shells. These standardized currencies transformed trade, allowing for the accumulation of abstract wealth and the rise of a powerful new social group, the merchant class. These traders became the lifeblood of the networks, risking everything to move goods from where they were abundant to where they were desperately desired. Different empires, however, managed this flow in radically different ways. The vast Persian Empire operated on a tribute system, demanding payments in precious metals, goods, and soldiers from its conquered provinces to fuel the imperial court and military. In contrast, the Greek city-states championed a more market-based approach, where private merchants competed in open agoras, their prices set by supply and demand. Imperial China often chose a third path, state-controlled commerce, where the government monopolized the production and trade of essential goods like salt, iron, and of course, silk, directing all profits into the imperial treasury. The Silk Road offers the ultimate case study. Silk itself became a de facto currency, a stable store of value that was lightweight, durable, and universally coveted. It circulated alongside silver and gold, creating a complex multi-currency system that spanned continents. This relentless economic activity sparked financial innovations we still use today. In Mesopotamia, temples acted as the first banks, safeguarding deposits and making loans. On the Indian Ocean, merchants developed early forms of maritime insurance, sharing the risk of a shipwreck among many investors. The economic incentive to protect these lucrative routes was immense. Empires stationed legions to guard mountain passes and dispatched navies to hunt pirates, not for glory but for gold. The taxes collected on traded goods funded magnificent cities, powerful armies, and grand monuments. So how did these economic flows influence the rise and fall of empires? A steady stream of trade revenue could bankroll centuries of expansion and cultural flourishing. But when a key route was cut by war, climate change, or a shift in demand, the economic lifeblood could drain away, leaving a powerful civilization starved and vulnerable. The invisible hand of economics was always there, guiding the chisel of the road builder and the course of the merchant ship, proving that the most enduring networks were those paved not with stone but with silver. A Buddhist monk and a Taoist sage could share tea and debate the nature of reality because a road or a ship had carried one of them across a continent. While silk and spices moved in chests and sacks, the most profound cargo traveled in the minds of people, a silent traffic of beliefs, art, and knowledge that would reshape civilizations. This process, what scholars call cultural diffusion, was the true legacy of these networks, often proving far more transformative than the exchange of any physical good. Cultural anthropologists note that this mobility sparked a constant, creative tension between foreign ideas and local traditions, leading to syncretism, the beautiful and sometimes uneasy fusion that births entirely new forms of culture. The spread of Buddhism from India across Asia is the quintessential example. As monks followed the Silk Road, the teachings of the Buddha encountered the deeply rooted philosophies of China. The Indian concept of nirvana had to be translated into Chinese terms, blending with Taoist ideas of the way and Confucian principles of social harmony. This was not a simple transplant, it was a conversation, a negotiation of meaning that gave rise to the distinct schools of Chan, later known as Zen Buddhism in Japan. This fusion was made visible in art, in the region of Gandhara, along the trade routes of ancient Pakistan and Afghanistan. Greek artistic influences, left behind by the conquests of Alexander the Great, merged with Buddhist subjects. For the first time, the Buddha was depicted in human form, with the serene features and draped robes of a Greek god, creating a stunning hybrid style that would then travel east and influence how the divine was portrayed all the way to China and Korea. The role of the translator in this process cannot be overstated. In bustling centers like Baghdad's House of Wisdom, scholars worked in teams, translating the entire body of classical Greek knowledge, from the philosophy of Plato to the medicine of Galen and the geometry of Euclid, into Arabic. Centuries later, these Arabic translations were themselves translated into Latin in places like Toledo, Spain, pouring the lost knowledge of the ancients back into a Europe emerging from its dark ages. This chain of translation, moving from Greek to Arabic to Latin, did not merely preserve knowledge, it expanded it, as each culture added its own commentaries and innovations. The pathways also carried the very languages people spoke. Aramaic became the lingua franca of the Near East because it was the language of trade and administration. Similarly, Swahili emerged on the East African coast as a Bantu language enriched with a massive vocabulary of Arabic loanwords, a direct result of centuries of maritime trade across the Indian Ocean. How did these deep cultural interactions challenge local identities? They forced a reckoning. A community had to decide whether to reject a new idea, adopt it wholesale, or, most often, adapt it into something uniquely their own. This constant, gentle pressure from the road enriched local cultures, giving them new philosophical tools, artistic styles, and scientific concepts, weaving a shared heritage of humanity long before the word globalization was ever spoken. A caravan did not only carry silk and spices, it also carried death. The very roads that forged cultural and economic bonds became the world's most efficient conduits for catastrophe, proving that a network amplifies everything it touches, the terrible alongside the wonderful. The most devastating example was the Black Death, a pandemic that swept from Asia into Europe in the 14th century, killing perhaps half of the entire population. It was the Silk Road that gave the plague its terrifying velocity. Infected rats and their fleas hitched a ride in grain sacks and cloth bales, moving with the caravans from one bustling, unsuspecting city to the next. This was not an isolated tragedy. Centuries earlier, the plague of Justinian had followed the same maritime and land routes of the Roman trade network, surging from Egypt to Constantinople, and then across the Mediterranean, killing tens of millions and helping to bring an end to antiquity itself. Epidemiologists see these ancient roads as the original super-spreader events, turning local outbreaks into continental crises with a speed that was previously unimaginable. These same pathways designed for peace were also the perfect instrument for war. The Mongol invasions are the ultimate testament to this dark duality. The very roads and way stations built by settled empires to foster unity and trade became the avenues for their own destruction. Genghis Khan's armies moved with breathtaking speed because they used the existing infrastructure of the lands they conquered. They did not blaze new trails, they commandeered the imperial highways, allowing their cavalry to strike deep into enemy territory before defenses could be organized. The roads built for control became the keys to losing it. This pattern repeated itself with chilling efficiency during the Spanish conquest of the Inca. Francisco Pizarro and his small band of conquistadors were able to march directly into the heart of the empire, following the pristine stone roads of the Quijapac Ñan. They used the Inca's own logistical masterpiece to topple the Inca state, capturing the Emperor Atahualpa in a city that was a central node in the network he supposedly commanded. Beyond the shock of armies and plagues lay a slower, more insidious erosion. The economic demand that fueled these networks often led to brutal exploitation. The Trans-Saharan routes were not just for gold and salt, they were also pipelines for human misery, carrying enslaved people from sub-Saharan Africa to markets in North Africa and the Middle East. This tragic commerce operated for centuries, its human cost incalculable. Similarly, the relentless extraction of resources could strip a land bare. The Roman appetite for cedar denuded the forests of Lebanon, while the intensive mining for silver in Spain left behind poisoned landscapes. This traffic also carried a psychological toll. For every merchant who found fortune, there were countless others who faced the constant threat of bandits on a lonely mountain pass, the terror of a sudden storm at sea, or the simple, grinding fear of the unknown that came with leaving home forever. So can the benefits of connection ever truly outweigh such a profound cost? there is no simple answer. The same road that brought a new philosophy could also bring the army that would enforce it. The same sea lane that delivered spices could also deliver a plague. This duality is woven into the very fabric of human connection, a reminder that every network, no matter how brilliant, is merely a tool. Its moral weight depends entirely on the hands that use it. A desert guide sees a path in the stars, while a sailor feels his way across the ocean by the rhythm of the waves beneath his ship. These ancient travelers possessed a genius for navigation, a suite of technologies both simple and profound that turned trackless wilderness and empty seas into familiar highways. Their tools were not found in a box but in the sky, the water, and the very land itself. Celestial navigation was the first global positioning system. In the northern hemisphere, the North Star Polaris remained a fixed point in the spinning night sky, a reliable beacon for countless generations. In the south, sailors steered by the brilliant Southern Cross. But this was more than just stargazing, it was a precise science. Arab and Persian astronomers developed the astrolabe, an intricate brass model of the universe that could calculate the sun's altitude and determine latitude, allowing a ship to know its position relative to the equator. The Polynesians, masters of the Pacific, created mental star compasses, memorizing the rising and setting points of hundreds of stars to create a celestial grid across the heavens. When clouds obscured the sky, they turned to the ocean itself. They learned to read the subtle patterns of swells, sensing how they bent and reflected around unseen islands miles beyond the horizon. They watched for specific species of birds, knowing their flight ranges would lead to land. The color of the water and the formation of clouds on the horizon all became pages in a living, breathing map. On land, the signs were more permanent but no less subtle. Cairns, carefully stacked piles of stone, marked trails across desolate landscapes from the Scottish Highlands to the Andes. The ancient Inuit built in Nuksut stone figures in the shape of people to act as guideposts across the featureless tundra. Some scholars of archaeoastronomy propose that even monumental structures served as navigational aids. Stonehenge, with its alignments to the solstices, may have functioned as a colossal calendar, marking the seasons for travel and trade, its stones signaling the safe times for long journeys. The quest for a reliable guide led to portable inventions that changed the world. In China, during the Han Dynasty, the first magnetic compass was developed. It was not initially used for navigation, but for geomancy and fortune-telling. Yet its potential was soon realized, and the lodestone spoon that spun on a bronze plate evolved into the needle that would guide explorers across oceans. Arab sailors used a simpler but equally effective device called the camel, a rectangular piece of wood tied to a string with knots. By holding the wood at arm's length and aligning it with the horizon and a specific star, a navigator could measure latitude with remarkable accuracy. Perhaps the most enigmatic tool was the Viking sunstone, a crystal of Iceland spar that could polarize sunlight. Even on a completely overcast day, by looking through the stone and rotating it until the light patterns aligned, a skilled user could pinpoint the sun's location in the sky, allowing them to steer a true course across the North Atlantic. This knowledge was not for everyone. The training of a master navigator was a long and secretive process. In the Pacific, this sacred knowledge was passed from father to son through years of apprenticeship, using only songs and chants to memorize the complex patterns of stars and seas. In the Mediterranean, sailors relied on pilot books called peripli, which were not maps but written descriptions of coastlines, listing ports, landmarks, and the distances between them. These detailed logs were priceless commercial secrets, the intellectual property that gave a merchant or a state a critical advantage. How did these technologies evolve? They were refined by necessity. Each new route, each longer voyage demanded greater precision. The compass evolved from a mystical object into a practical shipboard instrument. The astrolabe was refined and simplified into the mariner's astrolabe, a rugged tool that could be used on a pitching deck. This relentless innovation was driven by the networks themselves, as the desire to travel further and trade more safely pushed human ingenuity to its limits. Mastery of these arts was the final key that unlocked the world, turning the invisible lines of connection into charted paths of certainty. The stone surface of a Roman highway, once polished smooth by a million footsteps, now grows cold and silent. Weeds sprout between the paving stones, and the forest, long held at bay, begins its slow, patient reconquest. This is the fate of a network when the will to sustain it vanishes. The roads did not crumble in a day, but over generations as political unity shattered, and the economic lifeblood they carried simply stopped flowing. Historians point to a cascade of failures that sealed their fate. The Roman Empire's fragmentation meant no central authority to fund repairs or guard against bandits. A collapsed bridge here, a washed-out section there, each small failure made the journey more perilous, until the road was no longer a highway but a local track, and then nothing at all. The Great Silk Road faced a similar quietus, not from collapse but from obsolescence. The rise of reliable maritime compasses and sturdy ship designs made ocean travel safer and cheaper than the long, arduous overland trek. Why risk the deserts and mountain passes when a single ship could carry the cargo of 100 camels? The bustling caravanserais emptied, their wells filled with sand, and the knowledge of the routes faded from memory, preserved only in dusty manuscripts. In the Maya world, the silence was literal. The brilliant white Sakbiab, those raised ceremonial roads, were the first to be swallowed by the jungle when political crises and environmental strain caused the great cities to be abandoned. Without teams of workers to constantly clear the vegetation and re-plaster the surfaces, the jungle consumed the pathways in a matter of decades, severing the connections that held the civilization together. The economic and cultural isolation that followed such a collapse was profound. In post-Roman Europe, the quality of life plummeted. Goods that were once commonplace, like high-quality pottery and glass, became rare luxuries. The complex economic system that relied on long-distance trade fractured into small, local subsistence economies. Knowledge itself contracted, with literacy and technical skills becoming the domain of a tiny few. The recipe for Roman concrete, a material that could harden underwater, was lost for 1,000 years, a perfect metaphor for the loss of the complex, collective knowledge needed to maintain a vast network. Yet, even in their fading, these networks left a powerful legacy. The paths they carved often became the foundations for modern roads and railways. The ghost of the Amber Road can be traced in the highways of modern Germany and Poland. More importantly, they serve as a stark lesson in the fragility of our own interconnected world. Our digital networks and global supply chains are the modern equivalent of those stone highways and desert tracks. They too are vulnerable to political upheaval, resource depletion, or a sudden shift in technology. The silence that fell on an ancient road is a reminder that no connection is permanent. It must be maintained, valued, and protected, or it too will one day be reclaimed by the forest. A laser pulse fired from an aircraft strikes the dense green canopy of a Guatemalan rainforest, but its real target lies beneath. This is LIDAR, a technology that digitally strips away the vegetation to reveal the ghostly white lines of a Maya Sakbi, a raised road unseen by human eyes for over 1,000 years. The modern quest to rediscover these ancient pathways is a detective story written across the entire planet, a collaboration between early 20th century explorers and 21st century satellites. Figures like Aurel Stein, who followed the clues in ancient texts across the deserts of Central Asia, were the pioneers. With little more than a shovel and immense courage, they located lost Silk Road cities, pulling manuscripts and artifacts from the sand that proved the legends were true. Today, their work is supercharged by an arsenal of new tools. Satellite imagery scans vast, empty landscapes, revealing subtle discolorations in the soil or crop marks that betray the presence of a buried wall or a long-filled ditch. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses into the earth, painting a picture of what lies below without a single shovel being lifted. All of this data is then fed into geographic information systems, powerful computer mapping software that allows archaeologists to see patterns no human could ever spot from the ground. They can now trace a trade route for hundreds of miles, connecting a quarry to a port, a village to a ceremonial center, weaving disparate sites into a single, coherent network. One field archaeologist describes the moment of discovery as a sudden clarity, like hearing one instrument finally join the symphony and understanding the entire piece of music for the first time. This work is profoundly interdisciplinary. Geographers analyze the terrain to understand why a path curves in a specific way. Ethnographers interview local communities, whose oral histories and traditional land use often preserve the memory of these ancient routes long after maps have forgotten them. Botanists employ pollen analysis, studying ancient spores trapped in lakebed sediments to reconstruct what plants were being traded. The presence of maize pollen in a region where it never grew wild is the silent, enduring proof of a trade connection that moved not just goods but entire agricultural practices. These methods have led to stunning official recognitions, like the designation of the Inca Cuhapac Nyan as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, cementing its status as a masterpiece of human creative genius. Yet for all the technology, the work remains fraught with challenges. A road made of packed earth can be nearly impossible to distinguish from the natural soil around it. A single artifact found out of place could be the result of trade, or it could have been dropped by a lone traveler centuries later. Interpretation is everything. Each new discovery forces a rewrite of our historical narrative. Finding a Maya road where none was thought to exist reveals a political alliance between two rival cities. Tracing the extent of the Amber Road through chemical analysis of artifacts shows the staggering economic reach of prehistoric Europe. The work of rediscovery is a continuous loop, a conversation between the questions we ask today and the answers the ground has held for millennia. Every overgrown path we find is another thread pulled, slowly unraveling the true size and sophistication of the ancient world. A historian traces a glowing line across a digital map, connecting two dots separated by hundreds of miles of empty terrain. This line is a hypothesis, a best guess for the path of a lost trade route, born from the powerful fusion of theory and data. Scholars no longer rely on scattered ruins alone. They build entire digital worlds to test their ideas, using theoretical models to reconstruct the invisible architecture of the ancient world. These models are like detectives' tools, helping to predict where evidence might lie hidden. Central place theory, for instance, suggests that settlements organize themselves in a predictable hierarchy. A major city will be surrounded by smaller towns, which are in turn serviced by even smaller villages, all connected by efficient routes. This principle helps researchers guess where a road might have run, linking a capital to its regional markets. Another powerful tool is least cost path analysis. This geographic model calculates the easiest way to get from point A to point B, not as the crow flies, but as a human or a loaded animal would actually travel. It factors in slope, terrain type, and the location of vital resources like water. The path of least resistance it generates often aligns perfectly with the crumbling remains of an actual ancient road, proving that our ancestors were master economists of energy long before the science existed. These frameworks are brought to life through network theory, which visualizes the past not as a collection of isolated sites, but as a dynamic web of nodes and links. A city is a node, a road is a link, and the entire system can be analyzed to find central hubs, vulnerable choke points, and the surprising shortcuts that made the network resilient. Digital humanists then build simulations to test these theoretical webs. They use agent-based modeling, which creates thousands of digital agents, each programmed with simple rules, like a virtual trader seeking the highest profit or the safest path. When these simulated agents are released into a digital landscape, their collective behavior often mirrors the patterns we find in the archaeological record, revealing the hidden logic of ancient economics. The data feeding these models comes from a mosaic of fragile sources. The spread of a specific pottery style acts as a cultural tracer, mapping the flow of ideas and people. A hoard of coins buried far from its mint hints at a panic, or perhaps a thriving commercial route. Ancient texts like a merchant's log or a royal edict provide the narrative that breathes life into the cold data. The reconstruction of the Amber Road is a perfect example of this entire process in action. By plotting the find spots of amber artifacts on a map from the Baltic coast to the Mediterranean, a dense cloud of points begins to form. Applying least-cost path analysis between these points suggests the most probable river valleys and mountain passes the traders used. Network theory then highlights the key intermediary settlements that grew wealthy by controlling the flow, explaining not just where the road was, but why it existed in that specific configuration. How do these models help us understand the why behind network formation? They move us beyond simply knowing a road was there to understanding the economic pressures, the geographic constraints, and the human desires that demanded its creation. They allow us to see the ghost in the machine, the invisible hand of necessity that carved these enduring lines of connection across the face of the earth. A Greek sailor knew the story of the Golden Fleece was more than a fantasy. It was a set of instructions. The epic quest of Jason and the Argonauts precisely charts a voyage across the Aegean, through the Dardanelles, and into the resource-rich Black Sea, a route that would become a vital artery of Greek colonization. Myths were not mere entertainment for the ancients. They were the original guidebooks, written not on parchment but in the collective memory of a culture. These legendary narratives served as sophisticated oral maps and powerful moral guides for anyone daring enough to travel the invisible networks. Cultural historians point to works like Homer's Odyssey, a story that meticulously follows a known circuit of the central Mediterranean, its monsters and magical lands often representing very real navigational hazards or the cultural anxieties of encountering foreign peoples. The function of these stories was deeply practical. A legend about a many-headed sea monster lurking in a narrow strait could serve as a stark warning about treacherous, conflicting currents. A tale of a blessed isle overflowing with abundance might subtly encourage settlement or trade with a fertile, newly discovered land. Pilgrimage routes were particularly rich with this sacred geography. The journey to a holy mountain or a healing spring was almost always preceded by a myth about a god or a saint who had sanctified that very place, transforming a physical trail into a path of spiritual transformation. The stars above provided another canvas for these guiding stories. Constellations were not random patterns, they were the characters in celestial dramas that helped organize the night sky. The story of Orion the Hunter, forever pursuing the Pleiades sisters, gave sailors a fixed, recognizable clock in the heavens. its seasonal appearance signaling the best times to travel or the imminent shift of monsoon winds. This deep encoding of knowledge finds one of its most profound expressions in the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia. These narratives are not just the mythic past, they are a living, breathing map of the entire continent. A song about the journey of an ancestral creator being describes every waterhole, every mountain, every distinctive tree in exact sequence. To sing the song is to navigate the land itself, with each verse corresponding to a specific landmark. The knowledge of where to find food, water, and shelter is woven directly into the melody and the lyrics, a survival guide preserved in art for thousands of years. Even phantom islands on the edge of the known world played their part. Celtic legends spoke of High Brassel, a mystical island shrouded in mist that would appear only once every 7 years. This persistent myth, recorded on actual sea charts for centuries, undoubtedly fueled the courage of Atlantic explorers, pushing them to sail further into the unknown in the hopes of finding its fabled shores. What profound truths are embedded in these ancient stories? They reveal that for the traveler setting out on a lonely road or a vast ocean, the most vital supplies were not just food and water, but a good story. A myth was a psychological companion, a way to make sense of a terrifying storm by seeing it as the wrath of Poseidon, or to find comfort in the empty desert by tracing the footsteps of a legendary hero. These stories were the soul of the network, the narrative thread that connected the physical journey to the human spirit. A Roman merchant haggling in a Londinium market might have used the local Celtic word for bread, a simple transaction that reveals a profound truth. Languages did not stay put, they traveled, flowing along the same networks as amber and silk, and in the process, they reshaped how entire civilizations spoke, wrote, and thought. These routes gave birth to linguistic tools for crossing cultural divides, the most vital being the lingua franca. This was a common language of commerce and administration, a bridge tongue that allowed a Persian official and a Judean merchant to understand each other. Aramaic filled this role across the Near East, its script appearing on monuments and mundane contracts from Egypt to India. Later, the conquests of Alexander the Great seeded Koine Greek across 3 continents, turning it into the common tongue of scholarship, trade, and government for the entire Hellenistic world and the early Roman Empire. At bustling network nodes where a dozen different tongues collided, even cruder but highly effective languages emerged. Pidgins developed as simplified, hybrid speech forms, using a basic grammar and vocabulary drawn from multiple languages solely for the purpose of trade. When these pidgins became the first language of a new generation, they evolved into rich, complex creoles, new languages born from the urgency of connection at a crowded port or a desert crossroads. The very tools of writing were themselves products of this diffusion. The Phoenician alphabet, a revolutionary system of simple characters representing sounds, was adapted by the Greeks, who added vowels, creating the script that forms the basis of our own Latin alphabet today. This was not a mere borrowing, it was a creative transformation that traveled along established Mediterranean trade routes. The movement of belief systems carried languages across incredible distances. As Hinduism and Buddhism spread across Southeast Asia, the sacred Sanskrit and Pali languages traveled with them. Elaborate temple inscriptions in Cambodia and Java were carved in these Indian scripts, not as foreign impositions, but as the revered vehicles of divine truth and royal power, permanently weaving Indian linguistic threads into the local cultural fabric. This massive enterprise of translation and communication relied on a hidden army of scribes and interpreters. Multilingual individuals were invaluable assets, their skills allowing for treaties to be negotiated, goods to be valued, and religious texts to be translated for new audiences. The work of scribes, painstakingly copying manuscripts in scriptoria from Ireland to Mesopotamia, ensured that knowledge, from epic poetry to legal codes, could survive and travel. How did this constant linguistic exchange affect a person's sense of self? It created layered identities. A trader might speak his native dialect at home, use a pidgin at the docks, and comprehend enough of the Imperial lingua franca to understand a tax demand. Languages bled into one another, with loanwords for new foods, technologies, and concepts permanently enriching local vocabularies. The words we use today are themselves artifacts, silent fossils of these ancient exchanges, proving that the most enduring cargo was not something you could hold in your hand, but something you could speak. A river never asks permission to change its path. It simply carves a new one, and the ancient road that depended on its ford must adapt or be abandoned. This was the fundamental reality for every network builder. Geography was the silent partner in every enterprise, a force that could enable a trade route or erase it overnight. The deterministic view holds that geography is destiny, and the evidence is written in the relentless logic of the landscape. River valleys provided natural, gently sloping corridors through rugged terrain, their fertile banks supporting the agriculture needed to feed travelers and their animals. Mountain passes, though formidable, offered the only feasible points to cross otherwise impenetrable barriers, funneling all traffic through predictable gates. Coastal shelves became natural highways, allowing for easier travel and access to maritime resources. The route was always a negotiation with the earth, a search for the path of least resistance that would conserve the most precious resource of all, human energy. Environmental historians point to grand climate shifts that rewrote the entire map of connectivity. The gradual desiccation of the Sahara, transforming a green savanna into an ocean of sand, did not stop trade, it simply redirected it. The networks contracted toward the remaining oases, turning these isolated pockets of water into bustling, vital hubs like Siwa and Garama, where the price of a drink could determine the fate of an empire. In the north, the opposite occurred. The medieval warm period, a centuries-long uptick in temperatures, melted enough Arctic ice to open the sea roads for the Norse. They sailed their longships across the North Atlantic, settling first Iceland, then Greenland, and even reaching the coast of North America, an expansion made possible solely by a temporary change in the planet's climate. The builders' ingenuity is visible in their use of local materials. The Romans, blessed with abundant volcanic rock, paved their highways with unyielding basalt. In the swampy lowlands of the Maya, where stone was scarce, they raised their brilliant white sakbiob from packed limestone and plaster sourced from the local bedrock. The management of water was the ultimate test of a network's sustainability. Along the arid Silk Road, caravanserais were strategically placed a day's journey apart, each centered on a reliable well or spring. The loss of a single water source could collapse an entire segment of the route, stranding travelers in a deadly desert. This constant traffic, however, left its own ecological scars. The Roman demand for Lebanese cedar for shipbuilding and construction denuded entire mountainsides. The intensive grazing by thousands of camels and pack animals along the Trans-Saharan routes could strip the fragile vegetation around a well, leading to localized desertification. The dialogue between humans and nature is perfectly illustrated by the world's great rivers. The Nile was not just the source of life for Egypt, it was its primary highway. Every city, every temple, every farm was connected by its predictable current, with boats carrying grain, stone for pyramids, and imperial decrees from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa. In the Himalayas, the geography was even more assertive. The high, frozen passes like the Karakoram dictated the only possible branches of the Silk Road, creating choke points that kingdoms fought for centuries to control. A caravan master did not conquer the mountains, he learned their rhythms and pleaded for their permission. So how did these networks both exploit and alter their environments? They were a double-edged sword. A well-placed road could stabilize a slope and manage water runoff, but a heavily traveled route could drain local resources and scar the land. The path itself was a living record of this endless conversation, a testament to a truth we are only now rediscovering, that our greatest structures are not those built upon the earth, but those built in partnership with it. A single pottery shard, unearthed from a dusty trench, may soon reveal entire chapters of history we never thought possible to read. The future of studying these ancient networks lies not only in the ground, but in the data, a revolution powered by technologies that can see the invisible. Archaeologists are now using isotopic analysis, a technique that reads the unique chemical fingerprint locked inside artifacts. By analyzing the strontium in a human tooth or the lead in a silver coin, scientists can pinpoint the exact geological region where a person was born or a metal was mined, tracing individual journeys across continents with stunning precision. This turns a lone artifact into a passport, its stamps written in atoms. At the same time, social network analysis, a tool born from modern sociology, is being applied to the ancient world. Researchers can map the connections between people, cities, and ideas, visualizing how a philosophical concept might have spread from teacher to student like a ripple across a digital pond, or how the collapse of a single trading hub could have severed an entire continent's cultural lifeline. The sheer scale of this new research requires artificial intelligence. Machine learning algorithms can sift through millions of scattered data points, from satellite images to excavation reports, finding patterns no human eye could ever detect. They might correlate a period of drought in tree ring records with a sudden shift in trade routes, or identify the origin of countless anonymous pottery fragments to redraw the map of a forgotten economic zone. This work is fundamentally interdisciplinary, a grand collaboration across time. Geneticists trace the migration of diseases and people through ancient DNA. Climatologists reconstruct past environments to understand why a route was abandoned. Computer scientists build vast digital simulations, creating virtual worlds where we can test historical theories about travel times and resource distribution. With virtual reality, we will not just read about these journeys, we will experience them. We could stand on the deck of a Phoenician ship as it rides the Atlantic swell, or walk the gleaming white Sakbi of a Maya city at the peak of its power, hearing the jungle and feeling the scale of the achievement. Yet this powerful new lens comes with profound ethical responsibilities. As we identify previously unknown sites from space, we must also protect them from looting and the relentless pressure of modern development. The knowledge we gain must be shared with and shaped by the descendant communities for whom these networks are not just history but heritage. Some of the greatest mysteries remain tantalizingly out of reach. The sudden appearance of the Sea Peoples who contributed to the Bronze Age collapse is a perfect example. Their origins and routes are one of history's most enduring puzzles. Could an AI, cross-referencing shipwrecks, climate data, and fragmented texts from a dozen cultures, finally plot their catastrophic course across the Mediterranean? The grand synthesis awaiting us is a unified story of humanity, a narrative where economics, environment, technology, and belief are woven into a single, interconnected tapestry. The study of ancient networks is no longer just about finding roads, but about listening to the whispers of connection that still echo through time, waiting for the right tools to finally let them speak. From the first hunter-gatherer trails to the high-tech tools now mapping them, these invisible networks were the true lifelines of civilization. They were more than just stone and sand. They were the circulatory system of the human story, pumping goods, ideas, and beliefs across continents to create the world we know today. The stories of the road builders, from the Roman legionary to the Inca chasqui, speak to a drive within us all, a relentless need to explore, to trade, and to reach out across any barrier, be it a mountain range or an ocean. This legacy is not locked in the past. It lives on in the streets of our cities, often built over those ancient routes, and in the digital networks that now connect our planet with a speed those builders could never have conceived. Let this journey inspire you to see the hidden connections in your own world. The paths of the past still whisper beneath our feet and guide us forward. If this voyage into the mysteries of history has intrigued you, consider subscribing for more explorations and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these ancient networks, from the Silk Road to the Amber Trail, fascinates you the most?